So I don't really know what's going on with politics, right? I don't think anyone really does, unless they're like involved in it. A lot of people have different takes. Who's really good, who's really bad. I don't know. I mean, everybody's got their ideas, but so my perspective is though that whatever is happening isn't because of just individual instances of greed and individual instances of power-hungry people rising to these positions in order to serve their own greed and power-hungry mentalities. Okay, something has to be encompassing across the world and throughout time in order to corrupt politics as it has. And the reasons why I think so are because of basically three different things. Actually, there's more than that. But I'll start with those three different things. And so, the worldview indoctrination. This is the biggest, and this is how I really came to realize that something's not right here. And it's that. So the philosophical worldview. I'm going to go over the three things because they're all kind of related. The philosophical worldview indoctrination, the ancient history indoctrination, and the existence of other types of beings in the cosmos. Those three are huge, and they're all related. Okay. And so the reason I got into all this and started, realizing, wait a second, this isn't just, because at first I was just, I was getting through college. I started breaking out of my religion and started really thinking about the world. And I was like, man, this world's dumb. Like, everything's just controlled by money and greed. And it's just like, we could be doing so much better, but we're going through all this war and everything's just... People only care about, consumption and materialism, and that's what's promoted. And it's just all like, people don't get it, man. Like, that was kind of my perspective. And at that point, I was kind of like left wing, like, we need to, I really identified and agreed with that kind of left wing liberal mentalities. Like, we need free love and, move past the consumption and consumerism and save the earth and all that. And I mean, I still agree with all that stuff, totally. But where I really started to sense a bigger picture there was, so, right, and it was a key. I was raised Catholic, and then I started to grow up and question all that. And really question, is this God real? Like, what's going on with this? And so then I started studying a lot of philosophy. I started studying philosophy in school, in college, and I started, so I kind of gave up on that a little bit, and I needed some answers, right? I was like, well, then what is going on? And so I really trusted the mainstream academic and mainstream science view to get me those answers. And and that's studying philosophy in school and studying all that in school. And on my own, studying theoretical physics on my own, just kind of interested in all this stuff, got into like quantum mechanics and started looking into this stuff. And eventually, what I realized was that the mainstream view it's the mainstream philosophical view overarching mainstream science. It's really a philosophical view here. That's what you need to get. That's corrupted too. And so then I realized, like, wait a second, what's going on here? So the religions are all corrupted and kind of indoctrinations, right? Those don't really make any sense, especially the exoteric, the common understanding of it all. And then I started to realize, well, okay, so then the mainstream views in regard to philosophy and science, what they were teaching in schools is, well, say corrupted, I guess, it was wrong at first, I was like, oh, this isn't right. What's going on with this? And then I started to connect all the dots here. And this is crucial. So, And I started to realize that, okay, so then, there are other views in theoretical physics dealing quantum mechanics and everything that challenge the mainstream perspective, particularly of, let's just say, materialism. They call it physicalism now, and physicalism is just, well, it's all just physics. It encompasses more than just, it's all just matter, and it's just, physicalism is, it's all just whatever physics says it is. Well, what does physics say it is? Well, depends on who you ask. And so it's not really a very good explanation. But materialism as a premise is that, the universe, I mean, you can use physical and material interchangeably, but like the universe exists as a material system through which, their premise is if the universe exists as a material system, physical world, that fundamentally devoid of consciousness, which, arises at the Big Bang, and are there other universes? Maybe, that's kind of the idea, and then and it works through certain physical laws, and we try to figure them out, and then but basically the premise is that whatever, or stars and planets and all that, galaxies, they all form, and all this happens, and then on Earth, life happened to form, and that life, through a process of random mutation and natural selection, evolved, and through life evolving, consciousness came about. And certainly, that's how humans exist, and that's how consciousness within humans exists. Does consciousness exist in other life forms? Well, maybe, they don't know. But the basic premise is a physical universe fundamentally devoid of consciousness, through which creates all these, stars and planets and stuff, and then life just happened to form, and then life just happened to evolve into consciousness. And that's where consciousness comes from. A byproduct of the brain. Consciousness, in their view, is something that just comes about in the brain. Now, in that view in particular, the idea that the universe exists as some physical system fundamentally devoid of consciousness, and then through the development of life and the evolution of life, consciousness just evolved somehow as within the brain, something within the brain, a byproduct of the brain. That view has no sense of free will, because the basic premise is that, the universe works through these causal laws and determinism, and so everything has a cause and effect, and all causation comes from physical laws of the universe. And so consciousness just arises. And then, there's different views on this. That's the hard determinist view, which doesn't necessarily have to posit that consciousness is an epiphenomenon or byproduct of the brain. But that's also kind of the mainstream view, is that, they think consciousness is just this byproduct of the brain, which has no causal efficacy, and it's just something that's caused by the brain, but can have no causal effects on the brain or on the body or on physical reality. And then so I started to realize, well, this is dumb too. And then I realized that, there's other views out there which support relate back to ancient spirituality, and really it's that it's all mind. And the view I like is Nassim Haramein's holographic fractal universe model, and specifically his generalized holographic approach. But and that's his kind of view that, everything is kind of like a black hole system, and that it's all an information processing system, and that the information on the surface matches the information within the interior, and it's all a feedback loop and torus energy fields. And so, and then my interpretation of that is it's all mind, and it all relates to what's fundamental is consciousness and sacred geometry. I got other videos on this. And not see it, just consciousness, sacred geometry is fundamental, and this is a whole philosophical different perspective than mainstream science, and this is really critical to get into, and this is what I'm writing a whole book about. And so, how did this go wrong? So, right? And so, it all really relates back to, so how did it get so wrong with religions, and how did it get so wrong with the development of science? And then, and I look back into all this, and then, you could see how these ancient people had this understanding of consciousness and sacred geometry through things like Hermeticism, all is mind, right? And then the other Eastern philosophical views have plenty of views of, that all is mind, idealism, that the universe is a product of, our perception of a physical reality is a product of consciousness and not the other way around. But then there's, there are types of idealism. It's a lot to explain. And I'm going to get into a very technical analysis in my book. But in my videos, I don't prepare myself. It's easier to write and go back and be very technical. But in a video, you kind of just talk, right? And so where I'm going with all this is the worldview and so then I look back into the ancient history, and you can see how they have all these pyramids, which are built with this incredible precise mathematical precision. Precise precision, it's redundant, but these pyramids, there's pyramids all over the world, and there's these common themes in mythology. And, they have all these things that they built, and we don't really have, in the mainstream view, doesn't really have a way to understand this. They say, well, it was slaves, and I guess they think they were magic fucking slaves. I don't really know. It's well, they were slaves, so they could do it. Well, that doesn't really answer anything. And so it's really that the ancient past was more advanced because they were able to have all this advanced understanding of philosophy, and we're able to build these things which must have taken an advanced knowledge of energy dynamics. These massive stone blocks that they were able to move and build with this incredible precision, which encodes these foundational mathematical concepts and, is aligned perfectly to these stars, the pyramids shaped to Orion's belt perfectly. And, there's so many things that are just remarkable about this, to think that these were just primitive people doing these things and building them as tombs. No, and it really also relates to how they're on the energy structure of the earth, these ley lines and these energy patterns. And so it all has to do with all that, which, you have to have a understanding of reality, understanding of the universe as a non-material system, but as a process of information energy exchange in which consciousness is fundamental and ubiquitous, and, the life force energy, and it's all related to these ancient spiritual concepts. The life force energy, they called it chi in China, they called it prana in India. And they life force is kind of a Western term, and they, this has been around, and so it's and they denied this, the ether was more the science term, but they denied and said there is no ether, based on flawed experiments. I think it was the Michelson and, I don't know what the name of it was, but there's flawed experiments which thinks they denied the existence of the ether. But that's other scientists have posited no, there must be an ether, and that it's quantum at the Planck level, and that it's a lot to get into, but it's no, the ether, the life force, the chi, the prana, that's something real and relates to these ancient understandings. And that's huge to get, and so it's a whole different philosophical worldview about really what reality is, and it's really challenges a materialistic or physicalism perspective, and it also challenges a dualism perspective, which are in favor of a perspective that basically all is mind, idealism. And so this was really critical. That's what I'm writing my whole book on. And so then when you see how they also built all these pyramids and built all this stuff, and it must have had this advanced knowledge, more advanced, and going back even farther with some of the dates on all this stuff precede when they think civilization really started about 6,000 years ago. There's weathering on the Sphinx that they say that this erosion could have only occurred during this period that would have gotten this rain that would have been over 10,000 years ago, and it really challenges the mainstream notion of history and that they were more advanced. So, this perspective really challenges the notion of philosophy, the worldview structures, and of history. And then where do these beings say they got, where do these people say they got this stuff from? In their ancient texts, a lot of times it's from gods, from sun gods that came down and gave them knowledge. of how to build this stuff and how to do all this stuff. And so, there's other beings in the universe, and these beings weren't necessarily, like physical beings, because the universe isn't just this physical system, so they're spiritual beings, which is a whole concept all across all this stuff, right? And so it's like, and that's all really right there. So it's the philosophy that's really critical. And so what I think happened here was something happened in the past which relates to ancient mythology. A common theme across all these different cultures of ancient mythology, which have to do with, which deals with other types of beings influencing humanity. And that, also changes our perspective of history, of what happened in our history and how we got to this point. So those are the big three things. It's the worldview change, the worldview, the history, and other types of beings. Those three things, all kind of related concepts, are something I profoundly disagree with the mainstream perspective. And so, the basic premise would be, these, very basic, these beings came down, gave them this philosophy, whatever. And then there's also, other types, and that's how it all corrupts, and there's warring factors of these beings and all this, right? It's like the Sumerian text, kind of her big, premise of it all. But it's kind of a relation between all these different texts and all these different ancient mythologies. And so that's a huge part to really get on all this, is that there is the mainstream views in regards to philosophy, worldview, philosophical worldview, the ancient history, and other types of beings. And so that they went in the past, and so religions kind of formed natural religions, like pagan religions, which pagan just means kind of non-traditional, non-institutionalized religions. It's religions that aren't Judaism, Christian, and Islam. So these, these natural kind of religions formed, these natural kind of spiritual views formed, and then eventually religious, institutionalized religions took over as a means to manipulate and control the people, to obfuscate their understanding of that past. So, it's like, I'm mostly familiar with Christianity and Catholicism, and so it's like, they really literally demonized a lot of that kind of connection at times to astrology, which is a big part of all that, and really kind of tried to take hold of the narrative of what happened and said, no, these other gods weren't real and all this other stuff, and, are they gods meant to be worshipped? No, but they said, no, those aren't real, kind of took a hold of the past, took a hold of, this is in, so few, 1,500 to 2,000 years ago or more, they did this to take hold of that even further ancient past and say, no, all that stuff's not real. And so the mainstream institutionalized religions took a hold of that and were originally tried to indoctrinate the people and to obfuscate the understanding of history, their worldview, and of the type of beings. So mainstream organized religion did that initially, and look into Constantine and the Council of Nicaea, of how they kind of formed Christianity as a means, parts of governments. Governments did all this, right? Governments, can they be trusted? No. And so why? Well, why can't governments be trusted? So, it's not just individual instances of greed. That's kind of where I'm getting at on all this, right? So it's something's trying to cover up the ancient story. Something's trying to indoctrinate philosophical worldviews. Something's trying to obfuscate our understanding of the ancient past. Something's trying to cover up the existence of other types of beings in the cosmos. Those three things have been a consistent theme throughout history, and started with institutionalized religions. So the premise is, I'm spiritual but not religious, and it's not even say like a religion is a spiritual practice, and it's any type of spiritual practice can be considered a religion, but it's like the institutionalized, the large scale, big organized controlling the narrative, authoritative religions are the ones I have a problem with, right? You know, see what I'm saying? It's like those ones were controlled by governments and tried to obfuscate the understanding of our big three things: philosophical worldview, ancient history, and other types of beings. So that served that purpose throughout history with these institutionalized authoritative religious structures. And then so today, the religions, those institutionalized authoritative religious structures still exist, certainly. But more so, part of the indoctrination would be of mainstream worldviews in regards to science, mainstream view of history, and the mainstream understanding of other types of beings, which is different than the religious views, but still obfuscates and it doesn't get that original actual story. Well, from my take, what I find to be a better story of what happened here. I don't know what the actual story was. I'm not so bold to say that's what happened. I'm telling you, but I mean that's what I think makes a lot more sense, right? And so that's what's really key to get on all this, is that it always has been controlled to manipulate our big three, our whole worldview in terms of philosophy, the ancient past, and of other types of beings. And right, so I mean, I studied, so I say like I was grown up with the, religious Catholic, and so I got all that experience, and then I gave all that up, right? And I believed the mainstream view, and I went very hard into the mainstream view of philosophy today. I went very hard into mainstream science and mainstream history to try to figure out what's really going on and with the mainstream view of other types of beings. And so, I mean, that's what's important to understand. Like, I get it, I mean, that's their perspective, and it's just totally ridiculous, right? It's important to keep that in mind. It's like, so if you want to advocate and say, no, this view makes more sense, okay, well, let's have a philosophical discussion about it. But I don't think it does. I mean, I studied this heavily. The mainstream view of philosophy, of reductive physicalism, is total bullshit, and it thinks you don't even have free will. So if you want to choose that, well, you're kind of, if you're choosing it, well, then you do have free will. But, or you're saying, well, we're determined to do it, So if you want to just believe in determinism, hard determinism, go ahead and believe it, but I don't, which made me really question everything and look back and put all these pieces together. So when we talk about politics today, that's what I'm saying, is it's not just individual instances of greed. It's not just individual power-hungry entities trying to, power-hungry people trying to amass power for themselves. And it's not just some accident that history, that everything evolved to this point we're at now. And the point we're at now, when we talk about political corruption now, has to relate to all this. It isn't just one person's fault. It isn't just faults of networks today. It is something throughout all of history. That's, something has done this throughout all of history. There has to be, because those big three things are so pivotal, and that's where I can, the only thing I'm really confident that I know is my own consciousness. Second would be sacred geometry, and the mainstream views don't get this at all. And now I have videos on the conscious and sacred geometry. I'd watch those, and I can explain this in a little more detail. But it's really pivotal to get this. So when we talk about political corruption today, it only makes sense that it's something persisting throughout time and throughout history and throughout, it's not just one person. It's not just like group. It's not just Democrats, and it's not just Republicans in, the American view. And it's not just, right? It's not just, liberal versus conservative and different ideologies. No, there's something overarching that has controlled it throughout all of history to steer humanity down certain directions and purposely try to obfuscate what happened in our ancient past and purposely try to obfuscate our true spiritual power as co-creators of our reality. I got other stuff on this too, and so this is really key here to look at when we're talking about political corruption. There has to be something, that's why it's like, well, I don't really know exactly who's who in doing all this, but and that's the whole thing with Q, is like, that was what they said, is like Trump was going at, so the part of the premise I found is to be, there is this cabal that works to do this and to keep this, humanity in this lower vibrational energy state. And that's how it relates to these human trafficking networks, because it relates back to that ancient practice of sacrifice to the gods or demons. And they do this stuff still today. Right? And so it's like this cabal, this deep state cabal still operates today and does these things. And the premise of like Q and Trump was that they're, supposedly, I don't really know if they are, that's what I'm saying, I don't really know what's going on, that they were supposedly going after that and going after these corrupted networks. Are they? I don't really know. But when we really talk about what's happening, I think it, even if there isn't this deep state cabal that's doing this, I still think we have our understanding of philosophy, history, and other types of beings wrong in the mainstream views. Whether it's on accident or not, that's still a huge part of what I'm saying. Not like, well, no, and look, I'm looking at this stuff pretty heavily. You can sit there, if you want to say, it's no conspiracy. No, it's no conspiracy. Okay, that's fine. Let's remove the conspiracy aspect. Let's say there's not a deep state cabal consistently doing this throughout history. Something that, continues to corrupt it, and, different people come out throughout time to get a part of this deep state cabal and corrupt it, but something controls and organizes that to persist and continue that throughout history. Let's say there's nothing doing that. I still don't agree with the big three worldviews of philosophy, history, and other types of beings. So that has to be addressed. Because, throughout all of history, governments have purposely, well, no, we're not saying purposely here, right? Throughout all of history, governments have somehow just happened to diverge from what I think makes a lot more sense about philosophy, history, and other types of beings. So I don't find it a coincidence personally, but if you want to insist on removing any conspiratorial aspect of it, we still need to have a discussion about the philosophy and about the history and about the other types of beings. If you're not willing to do that and you just want to stay into the level of understanding you developed all your life, and that's fine, but you're never going to convince me that there's not a conspiracy then. If you're not even willing to engage in that discourse of philosophy, history, and other types of beings and really challenge what you think you know about it, and I'm just saying, it's like, I just want to have a discussion about it, man. I'm just saying, it's just like, what? I find the view to make a lot more sense, and I'm going to write a whole book where I can really spell out what exactly I mean. And I already wrote my paper. It's called Consciousness, COVID, and Corruption. Something subtitle. I don't remember what the subtitle is anymore, actually. It's kind of like, but something like a philosophical analysis of our COVID response in ancient history. I don't even know what. I have no idea what it was. But it's Consciousness, COVID, and Corruption. Maybe I'll post it in the links if you're familiar with me. I share it all the time. So maybe you've read it already and you see what I'm saying here then, right? It's that, these three things are huge. That we can't just omit that. And we need to have a philosophical discussion about all this. Because this philosophical view makes a lot more sense. All rooted in consciousness and sacred geometry, the things I find make the most sense. And so that's where I'm going with this, is we need to have that discussion. Is those three things really, I think, are huge when we talk about political corruption. Because I don't find it a coincidence that political corruption, that governments happen to go all throughout history to obscure these ideas that I find to make a lot more sense. And both institutionalized religions and mainstream worldviews of mainstream philosophy and science go down that path of directly against the understanding that I'm saying makes a lot more sense. And it's not that, there's plenty of scientific evidence to support what I'm saying, and that's how I started to get into all this. I'm like, wait, this makes so much more sense, and there's evidence to support this. Why isn't this being taken more seriously? And then I realized, well, they don't want to. So that's so huge here, right? So they don't want to. Well, who's they? Well, exactly. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Who the hell are they? Who doesn't want us to know this? Why don't they want us to know this? But, if you don't want to go down the conspiracy path, we still need to have the discussion of the philosophy. We still need to look into how that can relate to what these ancient people knew and how they were able to build these megalithic structures in the past. And then, how that all directly relates to other types of beings in the cosmos. And so that's so huge. And we really want to talk about political corruption. We need to address this aspect. If you're not willing to do it, then you're never really going to get it, in my opinion. And I mean, it's like you can have your opinions, but if you're not even willing to have a discussion, if you're not even willing to entertain these ideas that the entire mainstream worldviews could be flawed, then what do you want me to do? It's like, people who are very heavily indoctrinated with mainstream religion, if they're not willing to even entertain any ideas and have any discussions about, the real philosophical premise behind their entire worldview, then what are you going to do? And that's fine. If they want to just do that, that's fine. I'm not telling people you must question what you think. But if you're going to try to tell me what to do, if you're going to try to tell me I'm wrong, one, and you're going to try to tell me what to do, wear a mask, take a vaccine, lockdown. Yeah, if you're going to try to tell me all that and you're not even going to entertain your philosophical perspective, then you're just full of shit. And you're absolutely in no way any better than the dogmatic religious folk. At all. You're brainwashed by the same people, same powers, same things, just different perspective a little bit, but it's just as much indoctrination as their perspective. And if you're not willing to question it, then too bad for you, man. But I'm not gonna just listen to you if you can't even engage in philosophical discourse, all right? So that's what I was really trying to get out with this video, is where really comes political corruption, really comes all this. We really need to look into philosophical worldviews. I'm an apt fan of idealism. It really comes down, so there's basically three different metaphysical perspectives. Physicalism, materialism, which is basically everything's just some physical material world of consciousness. It's just some byproduct with no causal efficacy, no free will. Dualism, which thinks that consciousness is something fundamentally separate from a physical world which exists in itself fundamentally devoid of consciousness, which would be more along the lines of the religious view. So mainstream science would be more physicalism, materialism. Mainstream religion would be more dualism. Actually, organic, good philosophy relating to ancient spirituality would be more the idealism, all is mind perspective, to which I find the panpsychism, consciousness is fundamental and ubiquitous and non-local. A lot to get into here, but it's consciousness, the reality in itself is not fundamentally non-consciousness. It is within itself consciousness, and that our minds are a product of the whole system, and we are feeding back our perspective into the system. All right, okay. So that takes a lot to explain here. That's why I'm writing a whole book on it, and I write a whole paper on it where you can read it. Instead of me just rambling about and flailing around and sometimes getting off center, you can just read some of this stuff. I just encourage you to question and look into more of this, because these three things are huge. We got to look into that. That's so pivotal. And if you're not willing to engage in any of this discourse, if you just want to stay closed-minded and protest government corruption throughout history, but not look for the ultimate source in it, protest government corruption throughout history, but not question the worldviews controlled in the education system by these same governments, then I don't really know why, but maybe it's time to start trying. Yeah?